I thought people might want to see a video on my medieval weapons collection. Obviously they're not going to be original medieval weapons, they're going to be reproductions or replicas, whatever you want to call them. But I've got about 5 things here that you might find quite interesting. Now, unfortunately, because my camera's not too much of a wide angle, it's actually really hard to get this in frame properly. So you'll just have to make do, I'm afraid. If I had like the GoPro set up with a good microphone, that might be a good way of doing it, but I don't. So I'm going to start off with this Hanwei sword. This is, I believe it's called the Hanwei or Tinker Pearce arming sword or early medieval sword. Basically, obviously, the famous swords from medieval period are probably long swords or bastard swords. What an arming sword is basically the earlier, shorter version of it. It was, the main difference is compared to this is a long sword would be a bit longer, and it would also have a bigger handle, so you could hold it two-handed effectively. This you can't, which actually makes it a bit unwieldy. Now, I'm sort of quite mixed on opinion on this. It's got both good and bad things going for it. The good thing going for it when I got it years ago was the price. This was only, I think, just over £100 for a sword like this, which is actually fairly good because it's not, you know, like a war hanger, sort of wall hanger, you know, cheap crappy sword. But it's not brilliant either. It's got, you know, a couple of things. Now, the blade came very sharp, very good on it. Well, as sharp as the swords would actually be. I've talked about this before, but during a lot of periods of warfare, when you have swords and weapons like that, they don't have necessarily a razor sharp edge. I guess some could have done, but lots of them were sharp enough that they wouldn't blunt instantly on hitting armour, but they were obviously sharp enough that with a bit of force they'd go through a person quite easily. So quite a good point on there that you'll probably be able to see. Now I think this is made from some sort of spring steel, and it's quite a nice steel. I guess it's somewhere between stainless and carbon kind of thing. The issue with it is it rusts very easily. Now it doesn't look too bad, the blade, but you might be able to see little bits of rust on there. And it's basically one of those swords that wherever you get it out, even if you don't think you've got it wet or anything, you will have to put loads of oil in it before putting it back in a scabbard, or else you are going to get, you know, lots of rust on the blade. The other things I don't like with it is that the handguard on it's a bit wobbly. Oh, hitting the light there. Wobbly handguard, don't particularly know why. I guess that was one of the things that was probably held on a bit with glue, which is, you know, not really authentic. Very cheap kind of leather wrap, almost a bit like duct tape, to be honest. A handguard that's, you know, like peeling off. I think the stuff underneath actually looks a bit nicer, so maybe at some point I'll just cut that off and have it with as it was with the stuff underneath. The pommel is alright. It's a bit of a weird pommel on this. Basically, it's got a fairly decent tang that goes through here, but with these swords they designed them with this weird removable pommel that you could take off with an Allen key, and the idea is I think that you can replace the blades or bits of the sword if they break to make it a bit cheaper, which is a nice idea, but I don't know how much I like it. Because the thing that really annoys me is that rattle, because whenever you move this it rattles, and it's not actually the blade being flimsy, it's the handguard. But regardless, in hindsight I should have gone for a long sword, I think, because they are actually a bit easier despite the length to hold effectively, because this only lets you hold it with one hand. However, I think for the 100 odd quid this cost, it's very nice for when I got it. Fairly long blade, I can't remember what it is, I think it's 20 odd inches this blade. In terms of things, it's good for thrusting and it is good for sort of overhead slashing. Again, you could kind of use two hands for that. Again, the point I've tried to stress before, and I'll demonstrate this and show you the falchion next, is the falchion out of these two blades is much easier to wield properly, which is one of the reasons why falchions actually became so popular. So let me put this down and leave it out the scabbard, then I'll compare it to the falchion. So here's my falchion. This one was from Heron armoury. I had it custom built. That cost me about 400 odd pounds, but if you're really interested in a certain type of sword, it's probably worth finding a decent modern blacksmith that will make one for you to a very good standard. So this is much better quality than the other one, but again, you're paying like 3 times the price, maybe even 4 times the price for something like this. So this is only a 22-inch blade. I could have it made in several sizes. I went for 22 inches because I thought that's a good compromise between like a very short sword and you know, a long and wieldy blade, and obviously the longer you have the blade the more it will cost you. So 22 inches was a good number for me. I'm pretty sure it's 22 inches I ordered anyway. What I really like with the Falchion is the stacked leather handle, and obviously I've got the kind of fighting handguard on this with the sword trap and the sort of bits to protect your hands from incoming blows. Obviously there's the back of it there. So falchions don't have two edges normally. What a falchion has is the cutting edge, and then it has a thicker edge at the back, which means that you can swing it with more weight. So falchions are very easy to swing and stab with. Obviously if I had one without the elaborate handguard, it would actually stab slightly more straight as well. But yeah, falchions are very, very nice. Having the wider edge on the back means that obviously when you bring it down, it has a bit more weight onto the blade edge. But yeah, if I compare the two, I can't really hold the falchion in my left hand, so I'm going to keep it in my right hand because of the handguard. But yeah, it's like comparing these two swords. The falchion is so much easier to hold. One of the other things I don't like with the big counterweight pommel on this is obviously it needs to be like that to counter the weight of the sword, but the counterweight pommel can kind of dig into you if you're not holding it right, whereas the falchion's counterweight is a lot more uniform. So yeah, out of the two swords, the falchion is much more comfortable and natural to swing and move around with. Again, it's a shorter blade, but it's also much higher quality. So if you're interested in these kind of blades, the falchion is definitely the one I would go for over the sword like this. But as I said, if you're interested in those, I'd go for a long sword rather than an arming sword. As interesting as an arming sword is, but yeah, falchions were very common actually in the medieval period from everything I've read. The issue is a lot of them didn't survive for museums because the peasants who were armed with them, you know, or like the sort of peasant levies or whatever you want to call them, when they finished military service, it wasn't a nice sword that you'd, you know, have put in a kind of a ancestral collection like a nobleman's longsword was. What they actually ended up doing with these is using them as gardening implements and farming implements until they totally broke the blade down. They got a lot of use of them if they survived, you know, actual combat using these. But yeah, the reason falchions are popular, you can stab with it easily, you can hack with it easily, and it meant that soldiers who were trained as maybe as longbowmen or crossbowmen or had other roles could use a sword like this effectively. So if you're interested, the maker's mark, there's the Heron armoury one. But yeah, the falchion is, in my opinion, a much superior sword to the others. If you're incredibly skilled, a big arming sword or longsword is probably very effective, but for most people the falchion is much easier to wield. It feels like a heavy machete, and obviously you'd be able to use it better. This is made from a much better carbon steel, the falchion blade. It doesn't rust anywhere near as easily as the other thing. Obviously keep it oiled, but the handguard is made from a different kind of steel, and the handguard does rust a bit more easily, but that's because it's meant to be a strong, you know, firm metal, whereas the falchion is more of a flexible carbon steel. But there we go, that's my falchion and my arming sword. Okay, next up we have the Hanwei Viking axe. What I'll do is take the leather cover off the end, and I really like this one. This was, I think, like 60 or 70 quid, and they've done this effect with the metal that makes it actually look like it's quite, you know, old and retro, which is really nice. So it's basically, you've got a solid wood handle and an axe blade. Not very complicated. They did a couple of different axe head variants of these, and they came with either like this length, you know, handle, which means you can use it effectively one-handed or two-handed, and they do it with a much longer handle, which you might be able to see videos of reenactors using, and I think they're designed to swing over the top of shield walls, or on top, you know, over somebody with a shield, so you can actually just completely outrange them and keep a distance. But these are obviously a lot more practical ones. Now, where I've actually had a fair bit of use of hacking stuff off with this, you'll be able to see that, you know, the axe head can wobble a bit. This happens with any sort of axe, even wood cutting axes, that over time you need to basically either saw off a bit of the handle and put the axe head lower down, or you need to get a new handle. This isn't loose enough that it's going to fly off, so obviously I'm not worried about it at the moment. It does rattle a bit, but that might be something that would annoy some people if they had this and it rattled. It's nowhere near as bad as the sword, but just thought to warn you. So, of course, I have no experience trying to fight with a sword or an axe or anything. Fairly decent sharp edge. You might be able to see there's some little nicks in the blade along the top. Not anything major, but that's just where I've repeatedly hit metal and stuff like that. But yeah, these are easy to use in a sense. As I said, I'm not trained to use one, but you can use it fairly easily for what it is. Now, I've done several videos with these. A lot of people took the piss with those because they're like, oh, you're not trained to use that properly. Well, no, I'm just having fun with it. Because I think some people have this no fun allowed attitude with stuff like this. How dare you buy it if you're not a reenactor? Why can you just want it to have fun with in your garden? That's not allowed. Because one of the videos I tried was like seeing if there was some weird alternative fighting styles I could do with it, like thrusting it into stuff, seeing if it would penetrate. It would fairly well. See, not so I was swinging it actually like a war axe, but you know, who cares? Now, an interesting note about war axes, and actual military axes from this period, and pretty much real life, is you'll notice it doesn't have a massive, like, fire axe head or anything like that, or a double-headed, you know, axe head. For some reason, in lots of fantasy things and Hollywood, battle axes are always double-headed, and they're giant, you know, like executioner-style axe blades and all that. In reality, axe blades like these, they're designed to be small so you can swing them around fast and they don't weigh you down carrying the axe around. Why would you need all that extra weight? If I was to swing this into somebody, the speed of me swinging it in a small enough axe head would do enough damage as is doing that. You wouldn't need an actual giant axe head to do that. So yeah, out of all of them, using an axe is probably the most intuitive. One of the interesting ways I found you could use it is to hold it a bit like that and then thrust it away from you. It doesn't actually look all that fast, but that will cut into things fairly well. Obviously you can hold the thing in several places and just swing it as you would, you know, not chopping wood but chopping people. But yeah, the Hanwei sort of medieval Viking type axes are fairly good, I'd say. Again, they're not very expensive. It was about 70 quid for these, and you could get them in a couple of different varieties. And, you know, they're fairly good for that price, I can't complain. I think at some point, if I have a look and I've got spare money, I might end up getting one of their kind of Warhammer type things. Because you can get the sort of thing similar handle to this, but with the spike on one end and the sort of maul kind of hammer end on the other for probably similar money, which isn't too bad. Because these look nice, they work as an actual practical thing, and yeah. For like the 70 odd quid these cost, they're not too bad for what they are. So now we have the Flail, and this one was surprisingly cheap. I got it from Blades and Bows, and I think it was somewhere between either 15 or 30 quid. It was cheap for what it is, and I have literally no complaints with it for what it is. So you've got a big heavy cast iron metal ball on there with a good chain on it. Chain goes into here, that's riveted onto the wood, and then you've got your wooden pole. So yeah, it's a flail. I am not trained to use a flail at all. Lots of people find a video where I try and use this funny. I think Weapons Survival 94 did a video of one of these, and he was able to use it really well. He managed to wreck a motorcycle helmet with it. But so yeah, check out his video if you actually want to see these used fairly well. Now, these are actually fairly simple. You'd either swing them like that. I don't want to really try and swing this a big deal because I'm indoors and I don't have any padding on if it comes back and hits me. You know, overhead swings, sort of underarm swings. Now, there is the logic that you could obviously have it around your head and spin it to flail it faster. That would work, but obviously there's a lot more risks associated with that. And what I've seen where people have used these well is just simply swinging it like that, you know, does do enough damage. I think for most people, using an actual normal mace, you know, if you actually had this sort of mounted straight on there like that, would work far more effectively than trying to use it as a flail. But regardless, for the price this cost, this was cheap as chips for what it is, and it's absolutely fine. It's both practical and a wall hanger. I normally just have it as a wall hanger on part of my wall like that, but yeah, for the almost nothing this cost from Blades and Bows when I got it a few years ago, it is a nice piece of equipment. Because it's very rare that you can spend that little money and actually have something that's practical. I think they did this in both a 2- and 3-headed version, which costs more money. And last we have a wall hanger crossbow. This thing isn't really designed to be fired. You can shoot it, well, loosed I should say, not fired. You can shoot it, but it's really not designed for it. It came with a bolt which looks a bit naff and a bit bulky, so I don't use that with it. And there was a weird thing that stuck out the side there. You can see where the hole is where I've taken it out. Just there. I don't know what that was for. It it was like some weird thing, but it prevents you hanging it on the wall easily, that being, and it just looks a bit weird because I've never actually seen medieval crossbows with that sort of thing on it. So basically this is your standard medieval crossbow, maybe a bit smaller than the real one, but you know, no real sights on it as such like a medieval crossbow. It's got the proper sort of release system with the tickler lever and the rotating nut. So obviously there's no real draw weight to this because it's intended to be a wall hanger. You've got your hemp string, you pull that onto there, you'd have your bolt in it, and I don't mind drive shooting it because it is actually you know, a cheap reproduction. You do that and then it would release. Now the only thing I have an issue with on here is sometimes this comes out when you shoot it, not always, but sometimes it does. But as I said, these aren't really intended for actually shooting or anything like that. The actual reproduction medieval crossbows that are good for shooting cost normally like £200–300 plus. I know some people have said to me, why don't I get one? I've got really no interest in getting a proper medieval one. Not that I wouldn't like them, but that for that sort of money, you know, I could get other stuff I'm a lot more interested in. And it's also maintenance and looking after them because there's lots of issues with those. And another issue is obviously medieval crossbows are very energy inefficient. I've talked about this before, but there's sort of a fallacy or, you know, misthinking where people know that lots of medieval crossbows had high draw weights, therefore they must have been more powerful. No, it's because they're energy inefficient. They had to make the draw weights higher and higher to get, you know, more output out of them. It's like saying you've got a modern car that doesn't weigh very much and it's got a decent engine, so on whatever horsepower and torque it makes, it's a, you know, quite a speedy car. Then it's like saying they used to have to put higher and higher torque horsepower engines in these older cars because they were super heavy, you know, lumps of metal, and the weight would be offset by, you know, the engine. That's probably a bad analogy, but it'll probably at least, you know, try and explain to you how it works. That because old crossbows were energy inefficient, they had to have more and more draw weight, so you had to put more effort in just to get the bolt to shoot a bit faster or a bit further. With modern crossbows with like fiberglass and whatever else they put into them, you know, synthetic strings, they put a lot more energy that's put into them to cock them into the bolt when you shoot, therefore they're more efficient. So anyway, there you go. As I said, non-functional, but it looks very nice as a wall hanger. It's kind of got that nice patterned wood on it. Engraved wood, I guess you'd call it. And it's quite a nice dark wood as well, with whatever varnish they've put on, or it is something like teak or mahogany it's made from. But yeah, as I said, this isn't actually a functioning medieval crossbow, but you know, it didn't cost all that much, and I think it's a nice wall hanger, and that's primarily why I wanted it. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed this video on my medieval weapons collection, or replicas, or remakes, whatever you want to call them. I said the Falchion's definitely the pride of my collection here. That's the nicest sword by a county mile, or a country mile, whichever one you prefer. But some of the others are quite decent, and it really depends what you're looking for, obviously, and what you're willing to spend. I haven't got any crappy wall hangers that if you hit people with, or you know, did anything with, they'd fall apart and shatter and stab you. But yeah, these are quite nice, I think, for what they are. As I said, I have some little gripes with some of them, but nothing too major that, you know, would really upset me, especially considering the ones I have more gripes with are the cheaper ones that you'd expect to have problems. So there you go.